Welcome to Engaging ESG, where we consider, challenge, and celebrate the evolving world of environmental, social, and governance communications. I'm Jennifer Owen, Senior Director of Marketing at Caesar.
And I'm Katie Callens, Global Sustainability Lead at Adobe. For Season 3, we're talking with climate communications leaders who are shaping the future of sustainability messaging. From connecting with stakeholders to crafting compelling impact stories, we'll uncover the strategies that worked and learn from those that didn't.
Whether you're a seasoned pro or new to the field, you'll find practical tips and insights in every episode.
And whether you're working on your first sustainability report or reimagining your organization's climate narrative, these conversations will help you navigate the complexities of ESG communications. Let's get started. Jen, hello. I'm so glad we've gathered together again to spill the tea on the E, S, and G of it all.
Well, me too. This week, you have invited a particularly special guest who I hear is not only a former boss, but a very dear friend too.
Yes, I could not be more thrilled that today on the pod, we have Lyrica McTiernan, the leader, the legend, has joined us for a conversation. Some of you listening might not have met Lyrica, and for that, I'm sorry for you, but you're going to get to meet her a bit today. And by way of background, so Lyrica has spent the last 15 years helping companies launch and grow their corporate sustainability programs. She was one of Facebook's first hires on sustainability in 2010, where she built and led a team responsible for strategy, analytics, employee engagement, communications, and reporting for 9 years. And even better, I'd say, she hired me.
Oh, well, her greatest accomplishment to date, for sure.
Definitely. We're just going to underline that a lot and make people really uncomfortable listening. But so after hiring me and having her life change, she was at Facebook for a little bit longer and then left, which I was very upset about, but that's for a processing
really
drinks
all
conversation.
About you. I get it.
Once again, Jesus, did we invite someone or is this just a therapy session? Okay, back to Lyrica. So she joined WeWork in 2019 to lead their sustainable partnerships and external engagement program. And then in 2020, she started working as an independent consultant, leveraging extensive experience working in-house to offer clients a wide variety of services and inputs as a trusted advisor, helping clients chart their course in the corporate sustainability world for the first time, or deep diving into an area that's new for them, which I think is one of the many reasons that we're excited to have her here today, because not only has she been in the belly of the beast, so to speak, a couple of different companies internal making this work happen, but also now she's in a really cool space where she gets to consult with different clients that are in different parts of their sustainability journey. And we are so excited to have her here today.
Welcome, Lyrica. Thank you for joining the pod.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So we are recording this around the holiday season, which means that there's lots of interesting dinner conversations and holiday parties. And I happen to mention this podcast, as I'm wont to do. Usually I'm pretty embarrassed, but a couple glasses of Merlot help with that. And what this person at this sustainability dinner asked me was, engaging ESG. Are we going to keep using that term? Is that going away? And I was like, wow, we need more than a dinner to talk about this. But I thought it was kind of fascinating and could be a fun way to start the conversation, Lyrica.
Oh, yeah. Starting in hot.
Yeah.
Bring it on. Kind of your thoughts. Like, are we going to be using the term ESG 5 years from now?
I think it's a fascinating question. And I have had a personally kind of interesting relationship with the term ESG for a long time now, because when I started my career, I started working in quote unquote sustainability, not in ESG.
Right.
And I think that was largely because I primarily have worked on the E of ESG, the environmental piece of it. And so for me, back in 2010, it was just sustainability. And then people would say, what's that? And I would say, environmental sustainability. And they'd say, oh, water, energy. Then they kind of got it. And then it was only somewhat more recently, I would say, within the last 5 years, that suddenly ESG came on the scene. And I looked at that term and I was like, oh, is my brand off? Like, should I be talking about me doing ESG, not sustainability? Have I been doing this wrong all along? And so for like, I don't know, a couple of years in there, I just sort of inserted ESG instead of sustainability whenever I talked to anybody about what I did. I didn't do anything differently behind the scenes, but I just sort of glommed onto that term because it felt cool, right? It felt like the thing everyone wanted to be doing. And I was like, well, I am doing it, so I might as well call it that, I guess. And it always felt a little bit bizarre to me that suddenly I changed the name of what I was doing when I was doing the same work, sort of behind the scenes, but it felt like the right thing to do at the time. And then the last couple of years happened, and I just quietly reinserted sustainability instead of ESG. So for me, it's been this interesting thing because the work has stayed the same, really.
Yeah.
It's just sort of an extension of the same work. But I've just kind of kept an ear to the ground and used whatever term felt like it would be most interesting to the folks I was speaking with. So long story short, I'm not using ESG to describe my work anymore. I've just gone back to what I originally called it, which was sustainability. And I think for me, it's just a less loaded term. And again, because my work tends toward the E of the ESG, it does feel like an easier thing to flip back to than perhaps it is for some other folks who are heavier on the S and G pieces.
I totally find that coming from the diversity space previously, that ESG is synonymous with sustainability. Like you hear the diversity folks saying DE and I, first it was D&I, DE and I, then DEIB, and they keep adding letters to it. But you tend to hear that that's what that group is calling it. And ESG is also sustainability. I don't know if I hear the diversity crowd using ESG as much, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I do hear some companies, I think every company does it a little differently from what I've seen in terms of what they actually call the teams that do this work. And some of them have both. Some of them have the ESG folks and the sustainability folks. Some of them have just one team, and some will call it ESG and some call it sustainability. And I don't think there's a way that it's done.
Well, and just to give a third option, I feel like what I'm also wondering a lot more recently is like less using the term sustainability because it means something quite different in Europe, right? Like often it's more inclusive of social impact. So I've been kind of playing around with using like climate team, like climate work, right? Which I know, Lyrica, you're very deep in the world of climate transition plans amongst others. And so when we think about like climate sustainability vertical and then creating an output like a climate transition plan, which I might have you explain what that is real quick. That is an output that actually is going to be directly input to regulations that are referred to as ESG regulations.
I think it's a really good point because going back to how I described my work back in 2010, I would say sustainability. People would say, what? And I would say water, energy, carbon. And they would say, oh, now people say, what do you do? I say sustainability. They say, what? I say climate. So 100% on there because to me, it's a subtle difference, but a really important one because this bucket of climate and sort of tying things to climate has become this like really critical piece of strategy for so many people. And happy to go to transition plans. I actually had hoped we might go there. So happy to do that.
Maybe you can share a little bit about like what your work and world looks like, and then we can dive into climate transition plans. But I'm also in that world. And so
absolutely.
So what are you working on these days?
Oh my goodness. So many fun things. I have to say, I mean, as Kati mentioned, I was in-house for a long time. And then for the last 4+ years, I've been doing independent consulting work, which having gone deep in one company for so long is just such a huge, fun thing to do, to be able to try out multiple different hats in succession. And I've been really enjoying it. In the last year, some of the big things I've worked on, I've done some support for big tech companies, including Salesforce, kind of helping them with their work. I've also done some subcontracting for larger sustainability consulting firms, kind of helping them with their client relationships. And one of the interesting things I've also been working on is kind of helping to support conversations that are taking place, sort of multilateral conversations around the evolution of how we incentivize the right type of action. How can we get companies and NGOs on the same page? Because honestly, they often might seem like they're diametrically opposed in certain areas, but really, if you kind of pull back the onion, everyone wants the same thing, which is to maximize impact on climate. And where we get ourselves stuck is around the language and around how we're talking about what we're doing and around theories of change that might be different from each other. And so we end up talking cross purposes. And so trying to help facilitate these conversations in such a way that we can actually move forward together and kind of get the incentives fixed so that people can actually be investing in the things that matter most to climate. And that is a complex thing to do. And so I have found it really rewarding to work on.
That's great. I mean, do you find, are the beginning conversations to hook these players together, is it often the same? Or is it really like each relationship needs its own like level set in terms of terminology, what we're calling what we're trying to get to?
It's a little bit of both. I find that each entity that I speak with, be it for-profit company or NGO, comes at it from a slightly different perspective. And so there's definitely a little bit of level setting that needs to happen. But at the end of the day, when you kind of get right down to it, it doesn't take much to kind of get on the same page. Because I think there's a lot of frustration across the board, no matter what seat you're sitting in right now, because everyone is trying so hard and the stakes feel so high. And yet it feels like, given the complexity in the voluntary market and the voluntary sort of space related to climate action and the necessity of that action, perhaps now more than ever, given the next 4 years that we're looking at, it is so hard to actually get impactful work done. And it is so hard for people kind of sitting in companies, from what I've heard, to actually get support for some of the work, because it's very difficult to be able to articulate to leadership internally what targets you should be setting, what should actually count towards those targets, what will count towards those targets in the long term with any kind of level of sort of ability to say, yes, this is going to be the way it is. It's not going to change. We're not going to get thrown under the bus. And unfortunately, the reality is that for some folks, it can feel less risky to take less action than more today because of the risk of being called out for doing the wrong thing. And it's just such a shame, because it means you have potential capital investments that don't happen. You have dollars sitting on the sidelines that could be spent toward kind of moving us collectively toward the future that we all know needs to exist if we're going to kind of live in a healthy, sustainable world moving forward. So anyway, that's my little soapbox issue at the moment.
For sure. I was just talking to someone earlier today saying that there's like literally 37 different organizations that you could go to for your claims, either through the registries. Like, I'm in the carbon market, so the registries or the ratings agencies, the insurance companies, then the non-regulatory bodies that will decide on your claims. And it's just, the capitalistic side of me wonders if maybe some of this will shake out as runways end for some of these organizations as money dries up, and we can all just gather around the survivors to be. That's a really dystopian view of this. But I just need to know which groups that we can all point to, which guidelines work. I'm frustrated too, and I'm in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's such a tough moment because I think so much is broken. And so much of what's broken was made with the best of intentions.
Yeah, right.
You know, and that's the great tragedy of it. And it's so tricky because the temptation is to say, well, it's all broken. I have a better idea. I'm going to make the thing that's actually going to work. And a lot of people have tried to do that. And so we have this very cluttered space, and we don't have harmonization across how to count things, what should count, what can you claim about what you've done, and then how do you demonstrate progress toward what you're trying to accomplish. And you've got all of this sort of hodgepodge of standards and frameworks and incentives. And it's just so complex that it is not doing what it was intended to do originally.
Such a good point.
And I think when you're talking about, just to bring us back to like this conversation around communications, right? Like in companies and organizations who are trying to, or individuals even, they're trying to communicate this. Like one of the challenges I see at Adobe and a lot of organizations, right, is we have all of these frameworks and all of these ways of doing this work. And we're also going through a really interesting, like, shift in the maturity scale of the industry, moving from like so much voluntary to regulatory, right? We've talked about this on previous episodes as well. And I'm hearing this more and more from companies of saying like, okay, like when does doing the voluntary not add value anymore? Because I don't think a lot of companies, for example, are not submitting to CDP next year. But as someone who went through my first CDP deep dive process with Adobe this year, man, that was tough. That was incredibly uncomfortable. And like with many of these groups, and you both know this well, like you're often going back to the same stakeholders internally for the data, for the talking points, for the executive approval. And people are feeling super burnt out.
Yeah.
And so like when you have these teams that are lean, you have budgets that are lean and capacity, it starts to be like, well, if we have to get all of these outputs delivered to meet CSRD European requirements, California legislation requirements, SEC probably dead in the water at this point, then what also do we do on top of that? And how do you then start to decide, you know, is this because the executive wants us to talk about the like this specific project in the report, or like how does this align to our company mission? And so yeah, Lyrica, if you have any just general thoughts about like, pushing through and saying, or and just like how to say no authentically to things, because I think we're all going to crash and burn if we just keep saying yes and piling on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's completely right on. The interesting thing that I see is that the regulatory environment is evolving so rapidly that what it means to comply is actually a bit of a question mark for a lot of folks right now.
Right.
And so that makes it even more complicated, because some of the things that we collectively are being asked to focus on, it's a little unclear whether some of them
California
are going to fit within what's required now or next year or 2 years from now. There's just a huge, big set of question marks out there. And I think this is as good a time as any to circle back to transition plans. I think I think climate transition plans are a really interesting example of this, where, just for those who aren't familiar, a climate transition plan is essentially a relatively new term that has rushed onto the scene and is something that a lot of companies have started to create. Climate transition plans are referenced in CSRD, but at the moment, as far as I understand, it's essentially a do you have a climate transition plan type of a question. And if you don't, what's your plan to create one? So in other words, you're not required to have one, but if you don't, you got to talk about what your plan is to make a plan.
Right.
So they're clearly kind of encouraging you to be heading in that direction. So that's the tie to the regulatory requirement there. But then what is a climate transition plan? There's some differing guidance that exists, whether you're looking at CDP or CSRD or some of these other third-party structures that exist. My personal favorite guidance for climate transition plans is the UK TPT guidance, which talks about the importance of articulating the ambition that you have as a company, the actions that you're going to take, like the implementation strategy that you have, your strategy for engaging folks on these topics, and then how you're going to hold yourself accountable. The metrics and targets, the governance structures. To me, it's like a pretty comprehensive set of KPIs or set of actions that you kind of articulate, all related to climate. And I kind of love that it's like starting to tie together this concept of climate risk and this concept of accountability, and kind of bringing all of this work more closely tied to sort of corporate strategy more broadly. And I think that's a really positive thing. It's also kind of different from how people have been doing it.
Right.
But I think although it's awkward and confusing and hard in this moment of sort of transitioning how we talk about climate, I do think it's heading in a really positive direction. It's just going to take a bit of a lift to kind of shift from the old school CSR report, which we've come so far from, right? I think this is like, right now, I see a lot of companies putting out climate transition plans separate from an additional 2 other communication materials, which to your point, Katie, is like, oh my gosh, how many of these things can we put out? How do they fit together? And not all companies have a standalone climate transition plan. Some will say, oh, we do. It's like integrated in with all the other stuff we've already told you about. So I think it remains to be seen, to your point, generally, you're like, it remains to be seen who ends up being the winner, quote unquote, in all of this, in terms of the actual standard that emerges like a phoenix from the ashes and becomes the thing that we all follow because it's actually really awesome and does what we need it to do.
Totally going to happen. Yes.
Totally going to happen. It's going to be so beautiful. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. You know, we're still kind of stuck in this, like, things are smoldering and like some of them look pretty bright and awesome, but it's also really kind of dark all around the edges. So
yeah, no, this is great. Thank you for that overview. And like, we don't need
I'm just crying in a corner somewhere. Don't mind me.
Jen, go queep for a second. I'll just say I am optimistic about climate transition plans. And it's partially because I think when utilized effectively, they could be potentially the most powerful output that companies have had to do in this work. So if we think about CSR reports and sustainability reports as kind of mostly a narrative storytelling document, and then we have like the super nitty gritty data needed for CDP and certain regulations, climate transition plans kind of feel like the Goldilocks middle in some possible scenarios where you get to do the storytelling, the narrative, like, here we are on this journey. Here's where we've gone. But it then also forces you, to Lyrica's point, like, you have to often do a climate scenario analysis. You have to often get into kind of like, what are the roadmaps for the procurement team, the business travel team, all the places where scope 3 touches. And we're going through this process right now. Like, a big part of that is also gap analysis. And I think from a stakeholder engagement piece to what you were referencing, Lyrica, around like, teams have been doing this work for a while. If they're lucky, they've gotten buy-in to set public goals. Hopefully there's even science-based targets. But at the end of the day, there's this constant pressure on budget and efforts and like, what do we want to be known for? And what I'm excited about for the climate transition plan, in the world in which it's a magical document we can use for all types of regulations and also gets us buy-in. You know, it's the holiday season. We can be hopeful. I also am excited to use it as a tool with my leadership to be like, hey, this is how we stack up to our peers. This is like something that our major customers are putting out. And I think to date, when we think about CSR reports as an output, or even like CDP numbers, like those are just so hyper specific to those like communication verticals. I think what's nice about a climate transition plan, and quite frankly, what I'm hoping to use it for, is to then bring it back and get more internal buy-in for the gaps that maybe me and my team have seen for a while, but haven't had like a pretty externally verified document that also says that, which, as we all know, sometimes when it's not you saying the thing,
oh, for sure.
Listen to.
I was just going to say, you know, in my previous life, and I ran a very well-respected best companies list, and we would assess companies on, I got the application down to 650 questions. It was for reals. But then we would come and we'd present benchmarking data to the applicant companies, the 100 best companies. And that's, you know, that the HR practitioners already knew this. They knew everything that was going on in their company. They knew the trends, they knew whatever, but they really needed this outside group to come in and say, this is how you compare. This is your gap. What's happening here? And they turn to the HR people and they say, well, how could this be that our recruitment of women is so low? And they'd say, well, and then they'd go into their thing. And that's part of what's missing, is that they need the third party to come in to make it accessible to leadership to go, oh, we are falling behind, or they're doing better. The best thing that could ever happen in recruitment, retention, and advancement of women that when I was working on it was there'd be a great pissing contest in certain industries, the professional services. PricewaterhouseCoopers would do something and KPMG would match it and go beyond. And you just sit back and think, yes, please do compete to do better by women. Thank you. So, let's do the same here. And if I could start that magazine and have the publishing models work, I would do that.
It's a really important point too around like what motivates companies to take action. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot as well, because to me, you also start to have to think about claims because it can be so, so helpful to incentivize action. If you can say to your executive sponsor, hey, I can get you to have like, a CEO moment up on stage where you can say, we are net zero.
Yeah.
Just to throw out a random term that might be a bit of a lightning rod at the moment. Now, of course, you can't say that today because no one can be net zero today, according to many of the definitions of net zero that are floating about, SBTI, because you have to, reduce 90% of your emissions to get there before you can remove
even think about
the remaining. Yeah. So, but I think this to me is another really challenging and important conversation in this moment is this conversation around claims because they are so powerful as motivators for action because they can be hugely helpful to companies from a communication standpoint to be able to like put a little label on your company and say, I am this, I am that, and kind of have it be a part of your company persona and your ethos and have your CEO have like some great talking points about what you are, what you have accomplished. And this idea of net zero is such an exciting one. It sounds so good. Net zero, it's so hot right now. And it's very problematic because no one can claim that they are net zero if you're following the regularly agreed upon definitions. And so what is it that you claim exactly then? And so I think there's this open question, and I think there's a bit of a gap, frankly, a yawning giant gap in this claims space today. Because you can set targets, you can set a target for this or set a target for that. But what do you say about what you have done today? How do you demonstrate that you have done enough? Or do you just set a target for 5 years from now, 10 years, 20 years from now, 2050, which is so far away that it almost doesn't matter. I mean, it's nice, but what are you doing today? What are you doing now? Because we don't really have time to be dilly-dallying. Like, we need to be taking all the action we can today. It's a yes and moment. This is not a like, don't do this because it's not as good as that. It's like, do it all and do it as big as you can and then be able to claim credit for it. But that's where we get stuck.
Right.
Oh, man. Lyrica, I think on that note, oh my goodness. What do you say, Kati?
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on. I think maybe if you have 30 more seconds in you, I'd just love to think about the future where we're towards the end of the year, beginning of 2025 while we're recording this. If you want to think about us being all on a call together at this time next year, what are you hoping to have achieved or seen on the horizon? Like
30 seconds or less. 30, no.
No pressure.
Just any
worth of achievements.
Yeah, for the next year.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it has been a pretty dark couple months. I think there are a lot of question marks about the future. I think especially here in the US for the next 4 years, we're looking down a pretty grim set of realities for this work and what it might mean. And my hope is that a year from now, we, all of us collectively working on this work, have realized the importance of focusing on the things that matter and letting go of the details that don't, that might separate us and divide us. Because we, for the most part, are all really passionate, smart people who care a lot about this work deeply and personally. And that is part of what is so special about doing this work. It also can mean that we divide ourselves pretty easily. Because if I might agree with you 80% and disagree 20%, I love having these debates on that 20%. And I think a lot of other folks do, but we don't have time for that. I think we are in a moment where it is so important to come together on the big things we all agree on and move on those things as quickly as we can together. So that's my hope.
Wonderful. What a lovely note to end on. Thank you for that. And so just as we're closing here, I think we'll just say a big thank you, Lyrica, for joining us as our esteemed guest. Where can people learn more about the work that you're doing and maybe any sustainability, climate, or other named term hot takes that you might have in 2025? Where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Lyrica McTiernan on LinkedIn, so I'm pretty easy to find. I do also have a website, which is linked from my profile as well. And I'm working on posting more frequently. So this is a really good incentive for me to actually go and make some more posts so that people can learn more about all these great thoughts I've got going on in my brain every day.
Awesome.
I love it. All right. Well, we'll be sure to link to you in our show notes. And I don't know, Kati, we want our sustainability peers to join us and talk to us about how they're juggling the aspects of their company's sustainability narrative, their ESG narrative. What are we calling it now?
Climate transition plans. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Like, did you learn today for the first time what climate transition plans are? Or are you deep in the weeds? We are excited to bring on more guests this season. And so if there's individuals that you want to be hearing from or topics you want us to cover, let us know at engagingesg@gmail.com.
Thank you for joining us on Engaging ESG. Have a question for us to consider or a strategy you'd like us to cover? Email us today at engagingesg@gmail.com.
Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Engaging ESG today. It helps us grow, and even better, be sure to share the podcast with your favorite sustainability, diversity, or social impact colleague. And until next time, keep engaging.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.